In 1855, the United States settled upon a new 58 caliber expanding ball cartridge that was a derivative of the mini ball, probably more properly called the Burton ball in the United States. And along with it, they came up with a new cartridge to hold it. The 1855 expanding ball cartridge was made up of 3 different pieces of paper utilizing 2 different kinds of paper. You had a outer wrapper and an inner wrapper and a powder cylinder stiffener. And the inner and outer wrapper were made out of a more lightweight newsprint type of paper. And the internal stiffener was made up of a paper they called a rocket paper. So the first step is to make the internal powder cylinder. And to do that, you'd use the inner wrapper and the stiffener, and you'd wrap this up on a mandrel. And then we would withdraw the mandrel until the end was flush with that internal stiffener, and then fold these in. And the ordnance manual suggests using paste, and I find that a dab of Elmer's glue does the trick just as well. And then you have to set these aside to dry. And that's the internal stiffener. So I already have some powder chambers made up, so I'll put this back on my mandrel. And to complete the bullet, you take the outer wrapper and your mandrel with the powder chamber and a bullet. Now these bullets have not been lubricated nor sized, but for actual period ammunition they would have been sized. And in 1855 they were lubricated with a lubricant made of 1 part tallow to 3 parts of beeswax. Now to finish these, you'd take your bullet and the mandrel and the powder chamber, and you'd wrap all of these together. And it's a little fidgety to do to keep everything nice and tight and together while you do it. And then you'd use a choking cord to secure or pinch off the end of the cartridge. And then this would be secured with some linen thread and tied with 2 half hitches. And this constitutes the body of the cartridge. Now this cartridge, they'd make up hundreds of these and put them in trays, and they'd be sent off to a powder charging room where you'd have workers that had the gunpowder, and they would put that into the cartridge. So to charge it, the standard charge was a 60 grains of musket powder, and it would be placed inside the cartridge, and then the cartridge tail is just folded and pinched like so. We know what these look like because they're still surviving cartridges and arsenal packs for that matter. So that's an 1855 style of cartridge. Now you can see it was a little bit finicky to make, and it requires multiple pieces of paper and different kinds of paper. So by 1862 they found that with the war underway they needed a simpler way to make these, so they designed a simplified cartridge that utilized 1 single pattern of paper, just 2 of them, and 1 single kind of paper. And so to make the 1862 style of cartridge, you'd use a mandrel, same size, except one end is pointed like a bullet, and you'd simply wrap up the outer wrapper and the inner wrapper, which are identical. So it's a lot less fidgety to do. You do the same thing with your choke cord to pinch off the end of the cartridge. And you'd use the same linen cord to pinch the end tight and to secure it. And so by manufacturing this one component over and over and over again, you could store up hundreds of them in advance for making cartridges. And then to finish the cartridge, you just take 2 of them, because the inner and outer wrapper are identical. You'd take a lubricated sized bullet. Now by 1862 they had switched to 1 part tallow to 8 parts beeswax. The bullet goes in the outer wrapper, and then you insert the inner wrapper, and then it's ready for charging. So just like the 1855 cartridge, we use 60 grains of musket powder, and the tail gets secured in the same way as with the 1855 style of cartridge. And according to the Ordnance Manual of 1862, 10 boys could make about 800 cartridges in a day. So there we have an 1862 style of cartridge. Now the 1855 cartridge was probably a little bit more of an elegant cartridge than the 1862 to use for a couple reasons. First of all, the tail, there's only one thickness of paper here, so it was easier to tear the tail off. The other thing is with that internal stiffener in there, the cartridge keeps its shape a little better, so it handles shipping and handling a little better. And also when you do tear the tail off, that stiffener acts like a nice little mouth to help keep the torn end of the cartridge open so the powder comes out nice and neat. The 1862, when you tear off this tail, you're tearing through two thicknesses of paper, and it is noticeably more difficult to tear that tail off in practice. And of course, the end gets kind of mangled, and there's no stiffener to keep that mouth kind of open, so the powder can be a little bit harder to get out. But clearly, the 1862 cartridge, it's much easier logistically to make because there's less materials required, and it's a lot simpler to manufacture as well.